I'd like to welcome everybody to our call. My name is Winder Lyons, and I have Dr. Tracy Holdford on the line with us. Tracy is a quadruple Ph.D., amongst many other degrees. Tracy, why don't you just start by giving us just a sense of your background and how you got to this point.
Oh, okay. Well, basically, I started off with my parents in the military intelligence arena. And so I was in military schools from the very early age on. And I was one of those identified as being somewhat bright. And so they put me into what's called a fast-track program in the school system. As a result, I graduated when I was 13, and I had my first degree by the time I was 15, and all this is sponsored through the military and Department of Defense. So it went from there. So I've got my degrees in physics, environmental chemistry, organic, inorganic, and theology.
Those are your PhDs?
Those are my PhDs.
Well, how did this situation occur that you ended up with Touchstone Essentials and Eddie Stone in making a zeolite product?
Simply put, all my career since I've left the military in the Department of Defense, I worked by word of mouth. And that's how Eddie found me, by word of mouth. And so he called me up and said, I've heard about you and from other people that I know and trust, and would like you to do this. And basically he gave me just one instruction. I want you to do a zeolite product. I want you to follow the FDA rules and regulations on developing this product and how it works. And that's all he said. He didn't give me any other instructions or any other help whatsoever. And he said, I just want a zeolite product. And he turned me loose. And this is what we come up with today, is what we call Purebody zeolite.
Well, now, for those who are unaware of zeolites, give us just a short bio on zeolite. What is it, and how does it work, and why does it work, and how is this different than other zeolite products in the world?
Okay. Zeolite is basically, the technical term for it is a hydrated aluminum silicate. And it forms when you have volcanic action, whether it's lava or volcanic ash in the right conditions, that meets seawater or ocean water. Now, the conditions have to be exactly correct for this to happen, but it's actually more common than what we think. But that's how zeolite comes into being. The history of zeolite goes back to the early Romans. It goes back, before that, actually. And it's a lot of stuff on, about what the Romans did with it, but they used it primarily as a building material. In fact, there are buildings made out of zeolite that are still standing today that the Romans built. But what they did notice, and noted in their writings, was when they built aqueducts from the zeolite, that the water tasted better than the aqueducts that didn't have zeolite. And they didn't call it zeolite, by the way. They thought it was limestone. So it wasn't until, much later, a Swedish chemist coined the term zeolite, and he got that from two Greek words, which meant boiling stone. So that wasn't until like 1756, 1757, by a Swedish guy named Kronstedt. At that point, it was a curiosity. It was gem collectors and mineralogical people liked it, but they really didn't know what it was. It wasn't until the 1960s, late 50s, early 60s, that the first real studies that people started understanding what zeolite was really going on and what was going on with it. And so that's when the first published studies in the United States happened.
Why do you think it tasted better when the water ran over aqueducts that had zeolite?
It kept some of the natural organic material that was in the zeolite out of it. It drew it out.
You mean out of the water, you mean?
Out of the water itself. They used, in those days, they used lake sources. They used ponds. They used whatever they get a hold of. And so they didn't have water treatment plants. They didn't have, all this stuff. And so what taste of the lake is what you got in your water supply. Uh-huh. And the natural algae and whatever else was in that lake contributing to the taste, that's what you got. They just found the zeolite took out some of that. And they didn't understand why. They didn't question it. They just, okay, this is great, and here's what we're going to do.
Huh, cool.
So after the 60s,
yep,
scientists really started looking at why does this do what it does with water. And it was just, again, a curiosity, but they were like, this is something's here. And zeolite works because it has an interesting cage structure. It's a hydrated aluminum silicate. So it's got aluminum, it's got silica, and it's got a calcium, potassium, sodium, whatever inside that structure. But where those aluminum structures cross, inside this cage structure, it forms a very unique thing in nature, and that's a negative charge. There's very, very, very few minerals in nature that do this, and zeolite's one of them. That negative charge is what gives it its properties to remove heavy metals, to remove some organics, to help us detoxify ourselves in a very simple, very gentle, sane way.
So, in other words, if I'm understanding what you're saying is, understanding that the zeolites in nature have a natural negative charge that is a function of their structure.
It's a function of the structure. And now, if you break that structure, that charge goes away.
Okay.
So
when this negatively charged structure is in proximity to a heavy metal, insecticide, pesticide, herbicide, chemicals that have a positive charge, those chemicals are attracted to the zeolite, they stick to the zeolite, and then they're ferried out of our body within 4 to 6 hours of taking the zeolite.
That's correct. You think of it like the poles of a magnet. This is opposites attract. We all know that the South Pole and North Pole of a magnet will attract each other. Well, since the zeolite is negative and a lot of these pollutants are positive, they will attract each other. So opposites really do attract in this case.
Okay.
And it's fortunate for us that most of the heavy metal toxins and most of the toxins in our environment are positively charged.
Are there any that aren't?
There are a lot of pollutants that are not negatively charged, are positively charged. They are not removed.
Okay. So what would those be?
For example, some of the PCB, for examples, have a charge on them, but some of them don't. Some of the things we've been hearing about in the news with the plastic bottles will not have a charge on them. So not every pollutant and not every pesticide, all that is removed. It is specific to positively charged toxins.
Okay, so what happens to the toxins we get that have a positive charge or a negative charge that aren't dealt with by zeolite? How does our body deal with those things?
In a very short term, if it doesn't recognize it, it encapsulates it into our fat tissue and holds it there.
So it just stores it to protect it.
It's a storage issue.
Okay. Now, so when you're talking about the zeolites, and they have two functions. One, they attract or are attracted to positively charged materials. And if those materials are small enough, like heavy metal or insecticide or whatever, they're attracted inside the zeolite. Is the structure solid? Is it perforated? Is it describe what a zeolite particle actually looks like.
It looks like a honeycomb. It's an open structure. It's very porous. And that being said, in nature, we're not dealing with pure metals. In our body, we're not dealing with pure metals. We're dealing with salts. And so the size of that cage is literally measured in angstroms. It's like 4 to 9 angstroms, which is the size of an individual atom. And these salts are molecules which are much, much larger. But this charge is so strong that it will bring in to itself that material and literally bind it to itself. It's a true ionic binding motion.
Now the salts, by salts you mean like mercury, cadmium, lead, those sort of things. Those heavy metals are in salt form?
They're in a salt form.
And that salt is attracted to the zeolite. Does it get inside, or is it too big to get inside?
A lot of them are actually too large to get inside, but that charge is so strong, and we're going to get into this a little bit later too, as far as the size of the material and why that's important, is that it just adheres to that zeolite particle. Now, if you do happen to have a trace amount of, say, free mercury in your system, it most certainly will take that inside of itself. That's small enough to do that. But our bodies are pretty unique, and they really tend to bind it up in salts and try and get rid of it pretty quickly.
I see. Okay. So the zeolites, it's coursing around our bloodstream, attracting to itself anything that has a positive charge, and then it's excreted within 4 to 6 hours of our taking it, because zeolites will not store anywhere in our body. Now, is that correct?
The zeolite won't store in the body, and there's been a lot of animal studies and a lot of some people studies as well to back this up. And there's several effects of zeolite, how it captures pollutants and toxins. One is a pure cation effect, where you have an opposite charge, you have a positive, and that's a cation effect, and it just electrically attracts. There's also the sandwich effect.
Well, now hold on a second. With the cationic effect, so that people will understand what that means. If you have a water softener in your house, you have beads in the softener, and when the water flows over the beads, it will exchange heavy metals, which it comes in with the water, or minerals like calcium, for the salt that is stored on the beads. Now, and so in our bodies, what you're saying is it's the same sort of process, a cationic exchange, and the zeolite is carrying calcium.
It's carrying calcium.
And will bump the heavy metals or insecticides or chemicals or pesticides, whatever, will bump that calcium off of the zeolite and take its place and bind to the zeolite. That's what you mean by a cationic exchange.
Correct. In other words, the zeolite prefers a stronger bond. It likes really heavy charges. And a lot of these toxins, a lot of these pollutants and heavy metals have a +2, +3, sometimes a +4 charge on them. So they're very, very reactive. And the zeolite loves it. It really likes that. So it will give up a calcium with a +1, +2 in exchange for that lead, for example, at a +2, +3, sometimes +4.
Does it keep swapping up and trading up for the more and more toxic things as it goes?
Correct. As it goes. So that's the cation effect.
Okay.
But there's other effects as well we have to talk about, what we call the sandwich effect. So say you have a very large molecule. It's not going to fit inside the zeolite cage. But what happens, there's enough active sites that the zeolite will basically encase that through the surface charges and then transport that out of your system. And we call that the sandwich effect.
So 2 zeolites would gang up on a big toxin, is that what you're saying?
Correct. 2 or more, yes.
Okay, so they can pile in around something really big and haul it off.
And haul it off, and your body recognizes that, and it will eliminate that out of your system.
How does it get hauled off? Through the lymphatic system, or through what's the process?
Well, let's talk about that for a little bit, because there's 2 methodologies that we do with the Purebody zeolite. We mill this down to 0.3 micron.
0.3.
0.3.
0.3. Okay.
And
so that's 0.3 of a micron.
0.3 of a micron.
Okay.
And we've chosen that size, and this is a 0.3 mean average, so there are some particles in there that are larger and a lot more that are smaller. To be able to let some of these particles go through the colon and the rest be absorbed in the bloodstream. So as we go through this, we understand that there's a larger percentage that will go into the bloodstream, but there's also that part will go in the colon and flush out your colon, because we can't ignore either one of our systems in our healing process.
In other words, what you're saying is, if I'm getting this right, when you have particles that are 0.3 or less, they will absorb and go into the bloodstream and then do their work there.
Right.
Or if they're larger, they won't absorb into the bloodstream. They'll go in through the colon, clean the colon out in that process.
Correct.
Which is appropriate because we store a lot of toxins in the colon.
That is correct. And so we try to do, the best we could with addressing this, and that's the reason we have a 0.3 mean average. Not an absolute, but it's a mean average.
All right, so it does both. Okay, got it.
And it does both. And that occurs in the small intestine. So as you go in the small intestine, that 0.3 particle or smaller will go through the villi of the small intestine and enter the bloodstream. In the process of going through the villi, it's marked with a enzyme that tells the body once this changes, then we reroute it through the lymphatic system back into the colon and eliminate it, or through the kidneys and eliminate it, whichever is more convenient.
So in other words, once the zeolite has attracted all of the stuff that it's going to do, it puts out a different signal. The body recognizes that, grabs it, and excretes it.
And excretes it on out.
That's pretty brilliant.
And it's the wisdom of the body.
Wow.
And that's the same way that and there's very much a large presence, that's the same way that, for example, EDTA chelation works, which is very highly studied. It's the same exact mechanism.
Okay.
So we have a lot of effects on this, but there's also one other effect we want to talk about, and that's called the zeta effect.
Okay.
And once you reduce the particle size down into that 0.3, 0.1 range, that charge that is normally in a larger particle only at the intersection of the aluminum bonds, at that point, that charge goes throughout the entire particle.
How does that happen? Why does that do that?
It's all based on surface area. See, when you look at these crystals and you look at the structure, there's a lot of empty space in there. And so that, just like you have an air gap, if you have an open in your electrical system where it won't go across, you don't have your lights turn on. If you have an open in your circuit, when you reduce it down smaller and smaller, then it can go throughout the entire particle.
I see.
So that zeta effect takes over, and then the entire particle, even though there's still some silica in there, becomes active. And it gives just a much more reactivity to the zeolite, which allows it to be able to attract more heavy metals.
Now, there's really, as I understand it, two functions of a small zeolite. Now, typical zeolites that you find on the market, other than Purebody, what are the actual particle sizes on average that you find in other people's zeolites?
So far, from what I've seen in a real sense, and I've not studied all of them by any stretch, so this isn't an absolute, but I've not seen anybody that's really below 7 micron. So
7.0 as opposed to 0.1 or 0.3.
Correct.
And what happens when you get a big particle like that? What effect does it have in the body?
Well, it goes through the colon, and it does a good job in the colon, but it's not as complete as one would wish.
All right, so it does some good. It's not going to do any harm.
Correct.
Unless there's some contaminants attached to it. Now, in nature, as I understand it, zeolites always attract toxins, and that's why before human consumption they need to be cleaned.
Well, they need to be cleaned for several reasons, and let's go into that just very quickly because we're talking about a very natural mineral here. It's been in the ground, it's been, just rainwater, whatever's going through it, and so whatever's there has been attracted. And some of those substances may not hurt the body, but they won't help you. They reduce the efficiency of the zeolite by taking up space. So what we do in our process is to go through and remove all the organics. We have a process to remove any metals. And we selectively choose calcium to go back in to satisfy the electrical charge. Because zeolite will attract whatever if it's unbalanced. So we want to make sure we know what's in there. So we chose calcium.
And that's bioavailable calcium that our body can use like it would any calcium?
It's bioavailable calcium.
Okay. Not going to cause any problems. It's
not going to cause any problems. And is it enough to cure osteoporosis? No, it's not. But is it better than, say, sodium for some people? Most certainly.
Okay.
So that's the reason we chose calcium.
All right.
But in the sizes we're talking about, and I'm going to go into this a little bit of the surface area, With the larger particle, the vast majority of the active cages are not exposed. And if they're not exposed, they have no way of helping you.
So they're just inside the molecule and nothing can get to them.
And nothing can get to them.
Okay.
And so one of the reasons we chose the 0.3 besides the availability to the body's bloodstream is simply because the smaller the particle, the greater the surface area, the more cages are exposed, and the better chance it has of really helping the body remove those toxins.
So the smaller you get, you said the more surface area is exposed, meaning more of the internal structure of the zeolite is available.
More cages are available for actual working for you.
Now, when you're crushing this rock down to this appropriate size, how do you guard against losing the charge, and also how do you guard against having a lot of trash from this process being in your final product?
With our process, the first part of the process is a straight milling operation and is very standard, and we can't avoid that. There's no way to
milling by you crush it down to a certain size.
Crush it down to a certain size, and that's just so we can handle it.
Okay.
Beyond that point, we have a very proprietary, very exclusive way of reducing the size down, which we can verify, and I'll talk about that here in a second.
Yep.
Of the size. And it does so without damaging, and we're going to prove this with SEM analysis, without damaging that cage.
And nobody else in the world, no one else has this process. You said this was exclusive to Touchstone.
I believe this is exclusive to Touchstone.
Okay.
And the reason being is because we're the only ones that's going down to this size.
No one else has particles this small.
No one else that I know of has particles this small.
Okay, perfect.
And we chose, and 0.3 was a very conscious decision. I mean, we could take this down to a mean average of 0.1. We could take it down into a 0.08 mean size. We chose not to do that because we wanted to involve the colon.
Okay.
But that mean size, give you a correlation here. There's some other people talking about out there on the internet and about their products. They have about 90 to 100 square feet of surface area inside their products.
Okay.
And I've seen that number thrown around out there. We have about 7,000 square feet of surface area.
7,000?
Yes.
As opposed to 100?
Yeah.
Wow.
So when you take a look at this, it comes down to, the effectiveness of it and the actual, what you have working for you. That is the reality of this product.
That's a significant amount of difference. That's vast, incredible amount of capacity compared to other things. So let me ask you this. So let's say that somebody has a bottle of these drops, just for instance, and in our typical way of thinking, more is better. And so as Touchstone is recommending, one bottle a month is all that anybody is going to need. But some people are going to say, well, if one bottle is good, why shouldn't two be better? How would you address that?
Unless you have an active condition or active exposure that is something's critical, the reality of the body is it only can do so much at one time. And, our methodology here is based on two very, very, very concrete things. That the GRAS status, the generally recognized as safe status from the Food and Drug Administration, is based on 3 grams a month. That's been studied. It's been proved to be non-toxic, non-harmful as well. And that's based on years of studies and research that 3 grams per month is about as much as the body can handle without becoming stressed. And that's how come we chose to have 3 grams, in our bottle per month.
Okay.
You can, if you choose, do more. It may or may not hurt you. That being said, you may choose to do more, and you have a severe detox reaction because your body's overwhelmed. So,
yes, okay.
We chose to do, stay within the federal guidelines and have that 3 grams per month because we know that's not going to hurt anyone.
Now, detox, for those who are unaware of the ramifications of a too quick detox. Now, detox can look like the flu. You can feel like you have a flu, a headache, sore throat, dizziness, nausea, diarrhea. If you're not drinking enough water, constipation. I've seen people erupt to the skin with boils or rashes or things. And people will say things like, oh, I'm not taking that stuff, it's making me sick. Well, no, in fact, it isn't. It's what's in your body that's not supposed to be there that's trying to get out too quickly that's making you feel bad. That's what you're talking about, right?
Correct. And with this system that we have in place with the 4 drops 3 times a day, I would not ever expect that to happen to anyone.
Okay, so people can, in fairly good confidence, suggest that 4 drops 3 times a day or 3 drops 4 times a day is a good medium amount that should not cause distress to somebody. But what if it does? What if somebody's really sensitive? How should they handle it? Just back way down and continue to take it?
Just back up half of that and go from there.
Okay, and then work their way back up?
And work their way back up. Because, for example, if you're a farmer and you've been handling aluminum-based or mercury-based pesticides, herbicides all your life, your load's going to be much higher. And you may have a reaction because your body's so saturated. So we can't say for absolutely sure that a little bit won't cause that.
Okay.
But unless you're in that extreme population, that 0.1 of 1% population that has that exposure, then you're not going to have those kind of reactions.
Okay. But no matter, detox never looks good. It's always a pain, but it's necessary to have vibrant health, and it's always manageable.
And the way we've set this up is that the detoxification of your body through the zeolite product should be a very gentle, very organic, very natural way, and you really shouldn't feel bad. This should be very gentle. I mean, the zeolite itself is very inert, so it itself won't add to or take away from detoxification. So this should be a very gentle experience for people.
Okay.
It's unfortunate with our society today that our continued exposure to environmental toxins necessitates the need to keep continuing to detox.
Yes, unfortunately. But this done on a daily basis will enable us to maintain a level of health that is not possible with a toxic body.
That's absolutely true. This will enable people to begin thriving again.
Well, I think we're going to stop at this point for this conversation. And Dr. Tracy Holdford, and thank you for chatting with me here today. And we'll resume. We're going to do a series of ongoing conversations about these things. This is the end of the first one. Thank you very much.